um, no single verse of the Quran would contradict another verse. If you remember the example of graduality, if you looked at the verse in which there is a great harm and less benefit in wine, and you compared it to the other verse which is categorically prohibiting drinking and dealing in wine, you will see that both verses are in harmony or in contradiction. No, you are you are not following. Why? If you look, if we have the verse talking about the prohibition of wine, and the verse talking about that wine there is less benefit and greater harm, if we took them in isolation from the graduality approach which we have discussed here, they are completely contradicting each other. But do you think that the Quran is contradicting itself? So if the Quran is contradicting itself, so it is coming from a God who is contradicting himself, and it is coming to a community who are contradicting themselves, and it's all about contradiction process. So our religion, that's why we need not to study the religious text in isolation. That's why don't just open the Mus'haf. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اقتلوهم حيث ثقفتموهم. Just kill them whenever you see them. Okay? I'll go to my next door neighbor and then kill him right away. With this, I'll be applying the teachings of the Quran. I'll be a committed Muslim. You know why? Because you have studied this verse in complete isolation from other texts. If you want to study and reach a decision, okay, you are more than welcome. But gather all the verses related to killing, fighting, engaging with the Muslims, relationships with the Muslims. There are up to 110 verses mentioning fighting, engagement, war with the Muslims. Gather the 110 verses and the 110 or 111, I think it's 111. Talking about engagement and war in the Quran. Gather them together, my friend, and then start your own research exercise. You will never discover that there is contradiction. How can you relate? Kill them wherever you find them. With the other verse, be kind and loyal and righteous toward them. How can you relate this to the two verses in Surah number 60, verse number 8, 9 and 10 in Surah Al-Mumtahina, Surah number 60, as I told you, they are telling us to be good to the people of the book. How can you relate this to other verses talking in the Quran about that some faith communities are very close to Muslims and they would cry when they hear the revelation, and some others, they are far from the Muslim community and they may have animosity towards the Muslim community. So when you start reading in isolation, you will be in a big trouble. That's why I said here apparently contradictory. Apparently contradictory. There is a classical theory of nasakh which states that no information from the Prophet as to the existence of this. They say that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ didn't address the issue of nasakh, and the companions were in disagreement. Again, in disagreement. Now we come to the last part, which is the highlight. I'm sure you will enjoy it the most, inshallah. That's why I'm keeping it to the very end, while you are exhausted, in order to refresh our sitting. Yes, please.
Just quickly before we move on from nasakh or abrogating,
Yes.
you know, obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has knowledge of the future, of the unseen, etc. So would you say that it was more for our benefit or more for the benefit of the time? Because as he said, some ayat were revealed as events unfolded.
Yes.
Because if Allah wanted, obviously He knows what was going to happen, so He wouldn't have dealt
exactly.
verses.
If you want my personal opinion, I would go. I am more or less as a researcher, more or less with the view of those scholars like even the classical scholars like al-Asfahani. If you read the last note here, the classical jurists such as Abu Muslim al-Asfahani, he died in 1066, very early, during the classical period, rejected the doctrine of Naskh in the Quran, altogether. Some scholars in recent times, such as Muhammad Asad, very famous name, and Sharif Basyuni and Abu al-Fadl. Abu al-Fadl, he authored around 36 books, mostly published by Cambridge University Press about Islam and about the Quran, also rejected. So it is not fully supported. I know, I understand your point that so long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's better and what's not, why we say that there is naskh in the Quran and certain verses abrogated other verses. Some people would go to extremes employing the theory of naskh to the extent that they tell you a certain verse known infamously, unfortunately, you can say as the verse of the sword. Anyone here knows the verse of the sword, so-called? It's not the verse of the... Because the Quran is not a fighting book, by the way. It's not the book promoted by Geert Wilders as a fascist book. No. The verse of the sword, there is no verse in the sword. It is really wrong to say that there is a verse of the sword in the Quran and that it has actually abrogated 100 other verses. The verse of the sword is verse number 5, so-called. Verse of the sword is verse number 5 and sometimes number 9 of surah number 9 in the Quran. That's uqtuluhum, just kill them whenever you find them. This is widely promoted as the verse of the sword. So I am, as a researcher, I am more or less inclined to admit that there is no naskh in the Quran. And if you read that chapter, I advise you to read it quite carefully. It will answer many of the questions. But unfortunately, because of time limitations, I have to adjust a balance between different parts of the presentation. Again, is there anything unclear in what I have said over the last 10-15 minutes or so? You sure? Is there any questions? Okay. The tafsir of the Quran before we move in, that's why I was keen to this, because we will enter into a different section, a bit of a different part of our presentation, which is the last part of our presentation, hopefully. Tafsir of the Quran, again, literally and technically. Literally, it refers to interpretation, exegesis, explanation, commentary, and it also refers to commentaries on Greek scientific and philosophical works, equivalent in this last meaning to the Arabic word sharh. Sharh means explanation. Technically, i.e., what do we mean by technical definition within the tafsir scholarship? Yes, we have already dealt with the literal and the technical definition. When we say the technical definition of tafsir, what do we mean by it? I have to go down. To go down here, I don't mean the other figurative meaning. We have talked about the literal and the technical definition in general terms. But if I am addressing an audience and I'm explaining to them the literal and the technical definition of tafsir within the tafsir scholarship, what do I mean?
Daily problems?
Sorry?
Daily problems?
Daily problems, yes.
Well, let's say obviously the literal would be tafsir, as in the Arabic word, what does it actually mean?
Yes.
And then the technical would be the science of tafsir, more technicality. So what is it actually used for? Obviously it means this in Arabic, but what does it actually mean in context with the science?
Yes. There has to be participations from this side. Otherwise I leave the conference room and okay. Any suggestions? Just sorry?
Implementation.
The implementation? Yes. It's not quite difficult. I gave examples in the very beginning actually. I said that anyone here is a doctor or a medical professional? You are a doctor. So what does a hand mean to you?
A hand.
Yes.
It's a tool
In
which you
physiological terms, physiologically speaking, what does it mean to you?
It's a part of your body which which your body various different functions.
It has veins, it has blood.
Yeah.
Huh? That's his definition of a hand. Look, I'm a handyman. Like plumber, carpenter, whatever. Imagine. So the hand is a tool with which I grab the hammer, use the cutter, whatever. So the hand is in Dr. Furqan's terms is different from my own usage. And I have dealt with this before, but in the very beginning. But it is still very important. In Arabic, they may use a figurative language, figurative style of speaking, and they would have that he has many hands, which even in English, give me a helping hand, please. Give me a helping hand. Do we mean the literal usage of the word or the figurative? So these are three different usages of the same word hand. To a physician it means something. To a handyman, of course I'm not a handyman. To a handyman it means something, and to a writer or a man of letters it means something different. So tafsir in its technical terms refers to exerting the utmost human effort by an interpreter to communicate the meanings of the Quran. It's not the utmost human effort exerted by a handyman or a physician or someone else. So suppose that we got a physician or a GP who came up with an interpretation of the Quran. He will tell you, look, I have my own interpretation of the Quran. Look, this verse means so and so, and I'm a man of knowledge, I understand Arabic, and I can tell you that this is a proper interpretation. You tell him, look, you are not qualified. The one who is qualified to communicate the meanings of the Quran after exerting his utmost human effort, technically is known as a mufassir. Mufassir means an exegete or an interpreter. He has to learn Arabic, not just Arabic, but to know all the rules of Arabic grammar, all the rules of syntax, morphology. He must be fully aware of Arabic poetry. He must know the figurative speech and try to distinguish it from the non-figurative speech. He must know the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and he should be very much aware of which hadith is authentic and which hadith is not. He should be very much aware of the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He must possess a deep knowledge of fiqh, i.e. Islamic jurisprudence. He must be very much aware of how to deduce rulings from their original sources, i.e. to have developed a very in-depth knowledge of usul al-fiqh as well. So these are what makes a mufassir. What makes a mufassir. So we cannot have a GP or a dentist claiming, look, I have been, to so and so courses and I can interpret the Quran. At the same time, we cannot have somebody like Geert Wilders. Have you heard about the Dutch politician? It was, the talk of whole Europe maybe 1 year ago. The infamous, I wouldn't say famous, the infamous Dutch politician, Geert Wilders. He was trying to interpret the Quran for us. So he's not in a position to interpret the Quran. And whatever interpretations that's coming from somebody who is not specialized, can I accept a prescription from for an abdominal disease from a dentist? It's quite inappropriate. Okay, and he's within the same field. Okay, he studied medicine, but it's not quite appropriate. This is the same with religious studies. I'm a person who has been brought up from as young as 4 or 5, you can say. But at the end, I authored a PhD in Quranic studies. I am qualified to talk about the hadith, the seerah, the fiqh, usul al-fiqh, but to a certain extent. But my area of expertise is Quranic studies, and that's why we have to respect speciality. But unfortunately, brothers and sisters, and this is really heartbreaking, somebody who passed by Egypt, some people come to this country and they wear this imama and they wear the robe, mashallah, big scholar, and have been taught at al-Azhar. I warn you against not to be deceived. You have to question somebody's potential and read his CV and read about his qualifications and make sure that you are getting the proper knowledge from the proper person. I want to claim that I'll be a perfect lecturer in fiqh, but I can give, I can tell, I can advise. But what's my area of expertise? This is what we look for, and this is what the mufassir or the tafsir is all about. Briefly, Muslims were very much interested in knowing the meanings of the Quran. And they would go to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and have a word of mouth with him about a certain issue. And then after the Prophet's death, the companions were very much concerned with the tafsir. And we have certain names like Abdullah ibn Abbas. He was a very famous author in tafsir. He has a very early recorded interpretation of the Quran, but it is not available, unfortunately. Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas wrote a tafsir of the Quran, but his tafsir is not, unfortunately, available. It is lost in Muslim history. And then people like Al-Hasan al-Basri also used to have tafsir. Hasan al-Basri was one of the successors. Muqatil ibn Sulaiman was one of the successors. He was not a Sahabi. And in the post-successors period, in the first quarter of the 2nd century, the Quranic exegesis started to become an independent science on its own, especially with the birth of At-Tabari. After At-Tabari, great exegetical works were written during the classical period, such as Al-Zamakhshari, Al-Razi, the Tafsir whom we know about, Ibn Kathir, which is quite very famous. Dr. Rizwan came, so we'll be finishing in 5-10 minutes, maybe less. Ibn Kathir is one of the notable tafsir, and it is widely available in European languages. I think it's available in English. I don't know whether it is available in French or any other European language. The modern phase of tafsir started actually in the wake of World War II. After some Muslim countries were independent from the colonial powers, and then people like certain interpreters like Maududi, for example, in Southeast Asia, like Azza Darwaza in Palestine, like Sha'arawi, Qutb. Have you heard about these names? I think Maududi is quite a very famous name. That's why I'm mentioning names from different geographical locations. The historical stages of tafsir. Tafsir passed through different stages. Normally they are divided into formative. At this formative stage, the sciences, this branch of knowledge was fully developed. It was in the first quarter of the second century in pre-modern period. And the modern period started from the late 19th century up to the present. This is according to a very famous author in the field, that's Andrew Rippon. Andrew Rippon, he's a professor of Quranic Studies at Melbourne University in Australia. He's a very famous author in the field. This is very important before we finish, brothers and sisters, the types of tafsir. The methodology and the source. Can anyone distinguish between the methodology and the source, please? يعني tafsir according to the source of exegesis and the tafsir according to the methodology applied by the exegetes. The source, i.e. The exegete or the interpreter, he would focus on the Quran itself to interpret the Quran. The mufassir, the exegete, the interpreter, he will take the Quran as his own source to explain the Quran. So, in very simple terms, he's explaining the Quran through the Quran or by the Quran itself. While the methodology, he may resort to certain methodologies such as a literary approach, figurative approach, scientific approach to the Quran. So is that clear now, brothers and sisters? Yeah? According to the methodology, we have certain types of exegesis, that is a tafsir tahlili, or analytical exegesis. In analytical exegesis, all verses are interpreted according to their arrangement in a certain surah or a chapter, and then put together and understood together. As I told you, don't open the Mus'haf to surah number 9, verse number 5 and say, kill them wherever you find them. So in order to apply the golden rules of tafsir, you have to apply an analytical approach to these verses and study them as a group and then come to a certain conclusion. So we have a tafsir al-ijmali, that is the synoptic exegesis, which is an exegetical outline of the verses given according to the arrangement in a certain surah as well. And we have the comparative exegesis, which is where certain verses are analytically compared with, certain so-and-so exegete or interpreter has a view about this, and Mr. XYZ has a different view about this. So we are comparing the exegesis or the interpretation of XYZ and weighing them against each other. And we have the literary exegesis. Some people approach the Quran from a literary perspective. There are many of letters, like Qutb, for example. Qutb was a revolutionary. I mean Sayyid Qutb. I mean the author of In the Shade of the Quran, that's Fi Zilal al-Quran, that's published by the Islamic Foundation. So he was a man of letters and he was a revolutionary character. And he's very distinguished when he deals with the Quran from a figurative or a literary approach. And we have the thematic exegesis, i.e. I want to know all the verses talking about sabr in the Quran. So I'll gather all verses related to sabr, i.e. patience, all verses in which the word sabr has occurred, and then gather them together and have a khutbah about sabr in the Quran. Yes, I want to gather all verses related to justice in the Quran. Maybe certain non-Muslims are attacking the Quran, telling that it is a book which promotes injustice, and I want to prove the opposite. So I'm gathering all verses talking about justice in the Quran, and there are certain specialized glossaries or dictionaries, big dictionaries, like Madeleine, for example. This is in Arabic, I'm sorry, but you have المعجم المفهرس لألفاظ القرآن الكريم. It is, unfortunately, it is still in Arabic. It's not translating up till now. So if you want الأطفال في القرآن, or children in the Quran, so, and you want to do a khutbah about, you know, a Friday sermon, I mean, about the status of how can we, status of women in Islam, status of women in the Quran, children in the Quran, for example, Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Quran, Al-Bayt al-Haram, the sacred house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, non-Muslims in the Quran, the kuffar in the Quran. So if you want to do any thematic handling of these issues, you can resort to thematic exegesis. Efforts of Muslims in interpreting the Quran will continue until the present day. And here we come to the very end of our presentation. Thank you very much. And it is the Q&A sessions. The Q&A time. Please. Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah. Can I ask a sort of general question?
Yes.
What you said before. You know, you were mentioning how the Sahaba were, like, they were more open to learning from each other.
Yes.
Like, they were more flexible in terms of the way they approached the religion and the reasoning that they applied and stuff. Like, today, the way that we have the madhabs that people follow, like, and the way that, I mean, the way I come across it is very rigid, and it's kind of like we have a tendency to label and feel the need to, like...
You mean the younger generation?
Yeah, maybe not the younger generation. That's how I've come across it. And do you think, like, in that, being so rigid, in that we've lost the spirit of the way that they approached it in those days, or do you think it's necessary in today's times? Like, do you think that we need more flexibility, or...
This is, your question is actually the core of the keynote speech. This is, if you inshallah yani, follow the next presentation, it's just focused deeply on that approach. So this will, once we attend the presentation together, if you have any question, or if you think that this question is not answered, so there is a problem. So I don't think so, inshallah. So this will be perfectly answered. Are you going to attend, or shall I answer your question now?
No.
Okay, that's fine. You are more than welcome. So yes.
Got a question on alcohol. Obviously, in the aftershave and perfume, there's alcohol in there. And what's your opinion on that? Using and praying afterwards.
They were praying while their lips were dripping of alcohol. But this was at that time, you know, the issue passed through different stages, gradual approaches. First, it was made clear to them that, look, there is benefit, but there is greater harm. This is the first legislation. Legislation means this was the first order from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second order, and all of the orders regarding alcohol and regarding that gradual approach were limiting orders. One order restricts. I would say, I would prefer to use the word restricting orders. I'm trying to restrict the behavior of those wild people. But how can I do it? Should I do it like that? Clash? All of a sudden you have to stop? No. This is not the approach of the Quran. And look at, I'll come back to your question in a minute, but look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heavens and the earth. In Surah Fussilat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that He created the seven heavens and the earth. ثم استوى إلى السماء وهي دخان فقال لها فقضاهن سبع سماوات في يومين. يعني He created the seven heavens in 2 days, and then He created the earth in 5 days. I.e., He would have just all of a sudden إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون. Just in a twinkling of an eye, He would say, be, and it is. He is the all-powerful, the all-knowledgeable, the omniscient. He has the absolute power over everything, and we are created by Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Be and it is. But subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created man and allowed him to pass through different stages. He created the heavens and the earth. He created the hell and paradise over a certain amount of time. He revealed the Qur'an over 23 years. He prohibited wine. This was, as I told you, it was part of the culture. It was a built-in culture. Women and wine were just a built-in culture in the pre-Islamic society. So, but which ruling shall we follow? Somebody may come, I think I'm smart-minded. Allah says in the Quran, if they ask you about wine, there is less benefit and greater harm. Yes, to me it is wholly 100% beneficial. So he's just opening the Quran. لا تقربوا الصلاة. He opened the Quran, and the first verse which is struck his eyes, don't approach prayer. وأنتم سكارى. Do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated. Okay. He approached the Quran, and the first verse he read was فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Curse is for the of those who pray. Yeah, you have to complete. فَوَيْلٌ. Curse is for those who pray, those who are forsaking or they are not regular in their prayers. So you have to complete the whole thing. So if you are trying to study this issue, you have to apply thematic or analytical or comparative exegesis. Of course, it is thematic exegesis. You will go to the Quran and see why. The first thing you will do, it is mentioned in the Quran, that is kham. That is kham. Okay, glossary. A glossary, it might be Arabic dictionary or Quranic dictionary. This is the first stage. Number 2, gather words and phrases together. Number 3, meticulous and painstaking research. Number 4, hadith related. Number 5, exegetes, their sayings, i.e. the interpreters. Number 6, conclusion. Positive, negative. This is what you should do. The problem is, you will pick. When you start picking and choosing, you are like, what's the difference between you and non-Muslims? This is what guild builders have done with verse number 60 from surah number 8. And prepare against them whatever power you can muster, estates of war, i.e. horses used in war, in order for what? To terrorize the enemy of Allah and your enemy. So Islam is the religion of terrorism and the Quran is a fascist book. So he picked the verse which serves his own interest. He didn't apply academia, but maybe leukemia. It's not academia, it's any other chemia. But it is not academia. I have dealt with the Quran as an academic, from an academic background. And this single verse of Surah Al-Anfal, I was particularly saddened by the statements of Geert Wilders and the likes of him. So I can tell you a lot about that, but he's just a storm in a teacup, and this religion will eventually be victorious. This is what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, don't worry, this religion by Allah will travel as far as everywhere, and a Bedouin or a shepherd traveling between Mecca and Sana'a in Yemen would fear nothing except Allah and the wolf devouring his sheep. And the scholars of Hadith would say that why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ selected Sana'a in Yemen at that time in his Hadith. They would tell that Sana'a was one of the most dangerous areas at that time. So the Prophet was giving glad tidings for his companions that look, religion will travel fast. Had religion wouldn't have traveled fast, you wouldn't have been brought up and born here to a Muslim or a non-Muslim family. Had religion wouldn't have traveled fast, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned, I wouldn't have been able to make my way from Cairo to the Midlands or to the Islamic Foundation. Thank you very much for giving me the wonderful opportunity to come here and meet you. I'm more than welcome to answer all your further questions while being in the break, and I look forward to meet you again this afternoon around our highlight themes.